When you take a closer look at it, most religious books are full of ridiculous inconsistencies that require a whole lot more than just a leap of faith. Today, writer Chris Matheson, best known as the co-creator of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, joins us to discuss his new book, The Story of God, a biblical comedy about love and hate.
Listen as we take a look at why God, the central figure of the greatest story ever told, is obsessed with dongs, hates women, has no sense of humor, and pretty much acts like a 12-year-old boy throwing a temper tantrum at his birthday party.
Plus, his father, Richard Matheson's iconic Twilight Zone episode, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, featuring William Shatner, interpreted as a gay metaphor.
Yes, they are working on a new, totally excellent Bill and Ted movie.
And why the end of the world sounds like a bad acid trip. I'm Fausto Fernos.
I'm Mark Fillion.
And this is Feast of Fun.
Before we get started, let's listen to Chris Matheson read from his book, The Story of God, available at feastoffun.com.
God sits by himself, alone in the darkness. Around him, nothing. A void, no light, just him, sitting there in the darkness. Peering down in the darkness, he realized something. Underneath him was water. Cold, empty, utterly lifeless. It was creepy. Where had it come from? Did he make it, then forget about it? Did he not make it? And if he didn't, then who did? He had to have made it, yet he couldn't remember doing so. But if he had created water, as of course he had, then why had he created only that much reality and no more? Why had he been sitting there in the darkness above the water, basically forever? He didn't know why. He just sort of had. But now, for whatever reason, God had a thought. "Let there be light," he called out. And there was. God was delighted. He could do this. He could make things happen, create whatever reality he felt like. It was an extraordinary moment for him. Now that there was light, God could look around. Not much. Kind of a big nothingness, in fact, a void, essentially, except for the water below and, well, him. He had felt himself before in the darkness, but he had never seen himself. Now he did. He had 2 strong legs, a muscular torso, lean arms. He felt his face, eyes, nose, mouth, ears, hair. Had he made himself this way, created himself? Or had he somehow always been this? I want to think about it. Another unsettling thing. The penis that dangled between his legs. What was that doing there? It was ugly, God thought. There was no way he would have chosen that. It looked monstrous to him. He touched it. It reacted. He scowled and yanked his mighty hand away. This thing was an abomination, he decided. Fascinating in a way, perhaps, but bad, stirring certain feelings that seemed somehow wicked. And those hanging, droopy testicles below it, hideous. God had not discovered his backside yet. When he did, he was not happy.
Hello.
Hi, is this Chris Matheson?
This is Chris Matheson.
How you doing? This is Fausto Fernos.
And Mark Fillion from Feast of Fun.
Hey, how are you guys?
Doing great. We love your voice.
Good. That's nice to hear.
It's totally awesome, man.
Cool, man. It would be bad if you were like, we hate your voice. Your voice sucks.
Well, some people have nice voices and some people, they just don't.
That is true.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, you're well known as the co-creator of the hilarious Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And now you're taking us on the most excellent story ever told, the Bible.
That's it.
What made you want to put together this book, The Story of God?
Yeah, I think that I've got a real issue with authority for whatever set of reasons. It just kind of irks me. It makes me mad. And there is no more absolute authority than the Bible, right? So, I don't know, I just gravitated to it and I thought it was super funny pretty quickly. Like, wow, this is really, really crazy stuff. And I started just taking notes on that. Because from a comedy standpoint, it is gold. It is a gold mine.
It's a knee slapper. No, but I mean, all religious books are full of logical inconsistencies when you really take a look at them. And what I really like about your book is that you're sort of like going, sort of like the stand-up comedian, like, what's going on with, Noah's Ark? I mean, how do you put 2 lions and then we got,
Yeah, they are all filled with crazy things. It's true. And, people take them seriously. People take them literally. We're not talking about, it's not like talking about Zeus or Thor or something. They're like, people actually believe this and think this is the truth. So therefore it's worthy of being made fun of. Like, you wouldn't write a book making fun of Zeus because I wouldn't, because like, what would be the fun of that?
There are forums out there, but it's mostly like exploring the erotic possibilities of that.
of Zeus
And Thor.
I guess they'd be considerable. Yes.
You can Google and you can search and you can find Hulk Thor /fiction. It's quite lovely.
I bet it is.
Well, what I really like about your book is, though, you almost, in a way, because God in the Bible is presented almost as a man, and in your story of God, he is also much like a man, but a little bit crazy, all powerful, but still kind of confused by his own omnipotence.
Yeah, I think he is very much presented as a guy. He's got very human needs and fears and desires and angers, and he clearly struggles. It's obviously very difficult for him, and I would say he's pretty obviously mentally ill, in my view.
Well, so I don't want to sound like William Shatner in Star Trek: The Search for God.
Go for it.
Who is God? Let's talk about, because let's clarify here. You're not portraying the Bible as something else. In your book, you're doing basically an analysis of it.
I tried to. I'm quoting chapter and verse from beginning to end for that very reason. I wanted to adhere really closely to it. I wanted people, when they laughed, as I hope they will laugh, because it's certainly meant to be funny, I wanted them to like actually look up the Bible if they wanted to and notice, right, that is in there. He's not making this stuff up. I'm not trying to sort of like reinvent. I mean, I'm sort of extrapolating, I guess, on the character of God,
so let's talk about
life,
the Bible. Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start, which is Genesis. Why is Genesis so goddamn fucking crazy? And anytime anybody talks about how crazy the Bible is, inevitably they want to talk about what we all learned as kids. If you grew up in it was Abrahamic religion, the apple and Eve and Adam. And you were saying in your book that God's pretty much gay. Like, he doesn't give a damn about women. All he does is obsess about men and men's bodies.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much on the page. To the degree that this guy has sexuality, and he does have sexuality. I mean, he's not this asexual being. He's very, very interested in human sexuality, and he talks about it at length regularly. And he is specifically interested in men, and he is very interested in the male body, and he's particularly interested in male genitalia. And he's really got a very specific idea of how he wants it to look. You know, he cares a lot about like how a penis should look and how balls should look. I mean, like, that matters really. Like, they need to be perfect, and if they're not perfect, he wants nothing to do with it. I mean, like, really, that makes him mad. He wants
I've hooked up with guys on
them.
Scruff and Grindr that are just like that. No, but in what way is God manifesting his desire for the perfect nutsack?
Well, he talks about it at length. I mean, I'd have to like go grab my Bible to find the places where he talks about it, but he's very insistent. I believe it's with Moses when he's talking about the kind of animals that he's willing to that should be sacrificed, the kind of animals that make a proper sacrifice, and they typically are goats, and it's really important that the goats have perfect balls. Like, he will not, like, it doesn't make a good sacrifice if the goat's balls are flawed in any way at all. So that's number one. Number two, the men who will then present the sacrificial meal or enter the temple, if their balls aren't perfect, they can't do it. They can't even like enter the temple. He doesn't want any part of them. They have to have really perfect balls. Clearly, beyond that, he has a very specific idea. I mean, you could look at the book and you could go, why did you give men foreskins at all, right? Like, you clearly think it was a bad idea. Why didn't you just, like, create, circumcised-looking penises to start with? Because that's what you like. That's what you think looks good. So he's got a really, really specific idea. And women, on the other hand, he just seems to find them distasteful. He just seems to find them, like, they don't even get names, right? They're not even worthy of names. They're just not even, they're kind of unclean and they're impure. And he just sort of wants nothing to do with them. He just seems to find them distasteful in general. So yeah, he's gay. He's gay. Yeah.
That settles it. God's gay.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think on the basis of what's on the page, yeah, I think he is.
Are you familiar with the writer Edith Hamilton, who writes extensively about mythology?
Yeah, I've read a little of her, not for many years, but I did read some. I thought it was really interesting.
Her big kind of message was that, like, people get the religion they deserve, and all the mythological figures that they worship are in some ways a reflection of who they are.
Yeah.
And, you know, considering that all these religions kind of came out from the Middle East, and right now they're very obsessed with homosexual. Well, all of them have always been very obsessed with homosexuality as the great devil, you know.
Yeah.
Is the fact that God, in when you start scrutinizing all the logical inconsistencies in the Bible, where do you think is that coming from, their obsession with homosexuality?
That's a big question. That's a really deep question, in my view. What is the nature of it? And I don't know exactly the answer to that. It seems to be terrifying to a lot of men. It seems to be a terrifying prospect internally to feel those impulses, to notice those things, to think those thoughts. It seems to be very, very, very historically, in most cases, in most places, at most times, and now even in a lot of parts of the world, a very, very disturbing thought for a lot of men. I guess, you know, they're scared of their own homosexual impulses. They're disturbed by them. That makes them feel weird about themselves. I mean, I think it's something like that, but I'm not totally sure.
Well, here's an insight that I was thinking is that, you know, a lot of these religions came about at a time when people would die because they ate the wrong thing.
Right.
Or they had sex with the wrong tribe, or there was all these dangers in the world, and religion is in some ways an imperfect system of handling those dangers that are beyond our control. It's our attempt to control them through storytelling.
Right.
And so now that a lot of those dangers in the modern world have been removed, you know, people sort of start turning to the more primitive fears, which is sexuality.
Yeah.
And fear of sexuality. And that's why, you know, the Bible and Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Islamic religions, are also in the same nest of hating gays as public enemy number one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, if I understand you correctly, you're sort of saying that at that time in history, they were very strict about imposing certain rules. Maybe they perceived that these things were important literally for their survival, you know, like you can't squander any sperm because there's only so many of us and it's all got to be procreative, you know, it's got to be procreative. Otherwise it's really bad. And anything that leads away from that is bad for group survival, because that's what we have to be focused on. Not to mention, you know, there's a couple of mortal enemies of faith, in my view. There's a couple, and laughter is one of them, which is why I'm really drawn, you know, laughter and comedy those things are a mortal enemy of monotheism.
Because it would be hilarious to see them, like, instead of burning a book, burn a pile of bacon. You know, a delicious pile of bacon. And that would really upset people on the internet to see a big tray of bacon burning in the oven.
I think at this point, people would be very, very disturbed to see that much bacon being wasted. Yeah.
But if you think about it, you know, they in the Old Testament, they hated bacon just as much as they hated gays.
Well, they hate everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, right. I mean, all the prohibitions on what you should eat, and some of them are just kind of bizarre and crazy. Like, where are you coming up with this stuff? Why is that all right? And that's not all right. Why is it all right to eat, like these insects are okay to eat, but these insects aren't. And, this animal is okay to eat, but, it's okay to eat cows and sheep, but pigs aren't all right. And no shellfish and everything's fine. Except they can feel pretty arbitrary. They're probably not. I mean, there's probably I'm sure, you could find reasons for it, but they read pretty arbitrary.
Well,
I think, yeah.
Okay. Well, what I think it's interesting too is like when you look at this Bible, is like God hates everything. Everything he hates. Like even he hates water. And I wonder, how does that manifest itself like in the society that we live in? That this God that we worship hates everything.
He's like a 10-year-old boy.
I mean, my view, what I ended up feeling is he hates himself. There's just a very profound self-hatred to this character. And therefore, that's the mental illness, kind of. And therefore, the manifestation of him, because that's what it is, right? I mean, the whole universe, everything, all reality, if you take this book seriously, and I was trying to take it seriously, like, right, it's all true. And if you take it seriously, then it's all a manifestation of him. And he doesn't like it. And he really doesn't like much of anything. And he especially doesn't like human beings. He likes almost nobody. And even the one group of people that he supposedly likes, he doesn't like them. He really doesn't like, he has no use for women at all. And like, he doesn't really like, he made us in his image and he doesn't like us. So, all right,
and
there you go.
And his chosen people are the ones he punishes the most.
Oh, man.
Well,
my God, they get it so bad, yeah.
So do you think that that's the draw of the Bible for a lot of people, is that they don't like themselves and they hate a lot of things, and so they're drawn to this book because they're like, well, if God hates it, that gives me permission to hate it as well.
I think that's absolutely part of it. I mean, they wrap themselves in the cloak of love, but it's not really about love, is it? I mean, it's about hate, and there is a lot of hate in it and a lot of scorn, and it gives you can wrap yourself in that cloak of goodness and compassion, but that's not really what it's about. I think that is absolutely part of I think, to circle back around to where we started, I think people are scared of dying. Right? I mean, and why wouldn't we be? I mean, it's a scary prospect. So here's a whole belief system that tells you, well, you won't. You won't. You'll live forever. And by the way, the people who you don't like and they disagree with you, they'll be punished forever. That's a nice little bonus, too. So I think it has a lot of attractions, but I do think that's one of them, yeah.
One thing that I think people are more scared of in this day and age is, instead of dying, is loneliness.
Oh, man, you're so right. And it addresses that one too, doesn't it? Because it's like you move to a new town, you don't know anybody, go to your church. Suddenly you got 100 people around you or whatever number, and they're around you and they're hugging you and touching you and they're happy to see you and you're part of a community. That's a big, big thing, I think. And so you don't have to be, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not part of that world, so I don't really know. Does it really make you not lonely? I think what makes you truly not lonely is to get very, very close on a genuine level and intimate with another human being, not just be part of some big, group of people telling themselves some big fairy tale. That's my view of it, but I don't know.
But isn't like hell in some ways it's an interesting concept portrayed by this book because it's not isolation, right? Hell. It's more of what we experience on Earth already. So it's like
except fire and brimstone.
Well, we get burned. You get tortured. A lot of the people who
smelly farts, right?
Who read the Bible initially, and I always think the Bible is sort of like Harry Potter. You said this in past interviews, like it's fan fiction gone to the ultimate extreme, where they ultimately believe that this is real, and hell, when it was first introduced to a lot of the people, they already were experiencing it, right? Yeah. There was very little consequence, or it's not a very big threat when your life is perilous and dangerous and painful. To say when you die because you were a bad person or you didn't follow our rules, you're going to just get more of the same things you already are.
Well, the original concept of hell was Sheol, and that was, you were underground in like this dark caves, and it wasn't really, you weren't being tortured all the time.
You're not.
The torture came later.
So Dante's Inferno sort of like changed the way we think about hell.
Well, there's a lot of, I mean, the funny thing is, like, the Old Testament doesn't, like, it's true. I mean, it's Sheol, and Sheol is kind of just sort of like some weird, like, almost like more purgatory. You're waiting for something. It's more like you're a shade is the term they use. You're just sort of waiting, and you're kind of a shadow of what you were, and it can be visited. And it's not hellish at all. It's more neutral. It's not good, but it's not exactly bad. And I find kind of amusing and interesting that really it's Jesus who, supposedly is the great spokesman of love and compassion and forgiveness. He's the one who talks about hell and burning and fire and punishment. Now, he doesn't talk about it all that much, and he does talk about love and compassion at times, but he's the one who starts talking about that stuff. So, that's kind of strange, really.
Well, I always said that, like, waiting at the DMV is like hell on earth. And in some ways, the classic idea of hell was waiting in line indefinitely. Like in the movie Beetlejuice,
Right. The funny thing, yeah, right. That's hellish. Yeah, sure.
They go to basically when they die, they go to the DMV, and they're just sitting there waiting indefinitely until their turn is.
People don't like to wait.
What I find, one of the things I find funny about hell, there's a lot that's kind of amusing about hell to me, but one of them is that the eternity of it, because it is eternal, right? I mean, I'm not going to just be punished for like a month for these wicked things I'm saying and expressing. I'm going to be punished eternally. And like, how does that stay punishment after like 100 million years? Does it, at a certain point, it's just going to get boring, and it's not going to get, it won't really be punishment anymore, I don't think. And also, what can you do to people in hell? You can't, they're already in hell. There's nothing you can really do. So hell would be filled with people kind of, is language all right on your show, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Cuss all you want.
All right. Like, hell would be filled with people fucking. You know what I mean? And fucking the way, like heaven, no fucking in heaven. No fucking in heaven. In hell, people would be fucking, people would be drinking, people would be saying whatever the fuck they felt like saying, people would be laughing, people would be making fun of stuff, people would be alive in a weird way. And in heaven, no, you just sit there, endlessly listening to God blather about whatever he's going to be eternally. And you're just going to want to get out and get to hell where everybody interesting and fun is living.
You describe God as a frustrated blogger who wants everybody to read his status updates. Or
I didn't, but it's funny. I like it.
I thought it was. I heard you in an interview talking about that.
So, maybe the interviewer said that. I wish I could take credit for that, but I can't. But it's really good. I'd love to own that.
Because I always said, like, priests, you go to, because if you're not a religious person like I am, I never grew up in that religion, and to me, Christianity is just as foreign as Hinduism is.
Yeah.
And so, like, going to a religious service and you sit down and you're like going, and you realize as an adult, like, priests are basically just frustrated video bloggers. And they talk about the same things that video bloggers do. Like, they talk about fashion and finance and
TV shows,
what their favorite TV shows are. And it's just like,
and they're indignant or they're outraged, they're offended.
And to me, like, and what I really like about your book is that, it sort of illustrates this broken system that I don't know if we can escape, between the human mind's need for taking myth and turning it into reality, because ultimately it gives us control over so many things in life that we have no ability to influence.
That is going to be the big question moving forward. Like, can we move past this kind of stuff and maintain that need? Because you're right. I mean, I totally agree with you. That need to sort of feel that we have some control over a bunch of things, a universe that we don't have that much control over, is really powerful. But can we let go of some of these really archaic stories that, in my view, are really bad for us because they are really hateful and they're so intolerant, and historically they've damaged a lot of people. And so can we move past those while somehow satisfying that basic need to I don't know, have narratives that make us feel better somehow.
Well, I think it's interesting, though. It's like, I grew up Catholic, and in school, we studied, all the stories that are in your book. We all studied them, but they weren't presented quite the way you were. It's because, when you're teaching kids these stories, you frame them a little bit differently. I mean, they're still basically the same, but they're framed differently. And then as you get older, you start to realize, like, oh, there's more to this story, and like it gets more and more fucked up. And I think that a lot of people, they leave that scholarly religion behind, and so they just remember these stories from when they were kids, and they think that that's okay.
Yeah, well, Noah's Ark is the classic example of that, right? It's like when you're a kid, you see the cute little book of like animals 2 by 2 going onto the big wooden boat, and it's so charming. But all you have to do is take a step back as an adult and look at it and go, no, God is a homicidal maniac here, killing every single human being on the planet, like little children and sweet old grannies, drowning them all. Drowning, I think, is a particularly bad way to die, by the way. Really scary and slow. He's drowning everybody and all the other mammals, really just because he doesn't like what he did. And he never gave any warnings, by the way. It's just, he just doesn't like what's happening. So he slowly drowns everybody. So that's like the actual story. But of course, a bunch of times when I was writing this book, I thought to myself, how can anybody believe this stuff? How can anybody actually believe this stuff? I couldn't get my head around it. And then I came to sort of feel that it was likely that there's a lot of cherry picking that goes on, sort of what you're describing. It's like, oh, I like that little story, and I like that little story, and, that makes me feel good. That proverb is nice, and I like Jonah, and I like this, at a wedding, I heard somebody say this thing from Proverbs, and that's really sweet. And Jesus said, so they put it together. They build their own little tiny mini version of the Bible, but they don't read the whole story of Noah and the ark. And Noah, by the way, turns out to be a belligerent asshole. He's a drunken asshole in the end. Great judgment, God. You're one good man. The only time he speaks, he reveals he's just a belligerent dick. So, you got to read the whole thing to get the whole picture, actually.
Chris, if God's in control, why does he have to drown every living thing? Why didn't he just magically transform people into, the Westboro Baptist Church? That
is the giant underlying question of the book, in my view. And it leads to endless unspoken humor, in my view, because it raises it's like, you made all this. You did all this. You're all powerful. That's the premise of this book. If you're not all powerful, you're not God by definition. And yet, you're always mad. You're always upset. You're always pissed. You never seem to think things are going the way you want. And you do these incredibly mean, destructive things like kill everybody without giving any warning, which, by the way, he does the exact same thing in Sodom and Gomorrah. We don't know what anyone's doing in Gomorrah. We assume that, they're infested with or that Gomorrah is infested with homosexuality, just like Sodom is. But he gave no warning in Sodom. None. He doesn't give any warning. He never said anything. He just laser beams everybody, essentially. But why does he do this stuff? You're right. Why not just make everybody love him? And the thing that they will go for, they'll wave their hands around and go, well, it's free will. It's free will. It's because we have to have free will. But it's bullshit, because if God's all powerful, we don't have free will.
Let's talk about women's incessant need to nag.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I was hoping you'd bring that up.
Well, it's in Lot's wife, she gets punished for looking back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, why couldn't we just stay? Oh, why? And it's like, well, we're going to turn you into a giant pile of condiment.
Yeah, right.
And then in Adam and Eve, why not eat the apple? It's hanging there. It's free. Why, and to me, it is interesting that the Bible sort of like warns, and this is one place where I agree with the Bible, is that nagging is a very ineffective way of bringing about change you want to see in others, regardless of the gender you identify as.
Well, that's one takeaway from the Bible, then, a positive takeaway from the Bible.
But why is the Bible so obsessed with these nagging women?
Man, another just big, deep question. Why this view of women? You can step back and sort of do the meta sort of historical answer and say, well, it's a reflection of what men in the Middle East thought 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 2,000, whatever.
5,000.
Yeah, 5,000, however far back it goes. It's that. I mean, I would say but that's not really satisfying because we still see that stuff around today. People still see women that way. So, what is that about? Do men just
it's
not
misplaced
like women?
power. It's misplaced power when you don't give a group of people the ability to sort of control their lives. They're going to do it in a manipulative way, and that ultimately, I think that's why nagging is associated with women, is because so many women throughout history and society, different cultures, have not been given the ability for self-governance, for self-destinies.
Yeah, I think that's probably largely right. I mean, I think there's, I would agree with that. I think that's well said.
And so, like a friend of mine said, is that the Bible is this homophobic, sexist, racist book that advocates slavery. Why are we even paying attention to anything that it has to say?
Yeah, that question has got to be answered. And I think, one of the things that I wanted to do in this book is I wanted to basically point, like, this is the ultimate emperor's new clothes, right? We're asked to take this seriously. We're asked to be respectful towards this book. We're asked, this is my faith. Please don't make fun of me for this. And our whole country is built on this. It's on our money. It's, the idea that an atheist could be elected president, not to mention senator or even or mayor. I mean, I just don't see it happening. It just couldn't happen.
Well, we already have an Islamic president.
Yeah, that's right. We do. That's true. But most people don't. A lot of gullible people don't seem to realize that, which is sad. But of course he is.
But if you think about it, like all these Tea Partiers for years, they've been saying like, Obama's a Muslim, Obama's a Muslim. So the next time an actual Muslim runs for president, he can just say, well, you guys already had one. So it wouldn't be the first time.
Right. I don't know what you're upset about. Clearly, Obama was a Muslim, and so, like, get over it, man. Right.
Well, so how do you feel about people saying you should respect my religion?
I think they're full of shit. I mean, basically, I think they're full of shit because in this life, you don't get to just kind of wrap your. You don't get to point to a little place on your body and go, that spot right there, you can't hit me there. You're not allowed to. That's a special spot. That's my special spot. You're not allowed to touch that. That's really delicate. And you're just, from my standpoint, it's like, well, fuck you. I mean, I'm not going to listen to that. Why should I do that? On what basis would I do that? Especially when you think that just because I disagree with you, I'm going to be punished eternally. So the hell with you. Why should I treat you respectfully? You think I'm going to be punished eternally simply because I don't agree with you. That's one part. And then on the other hand, like, thank you very much for pointing out where you're the most delicate, where you've got a glass jaw. I mean, thanks for pointing it out. Now I know exactly where to go after you. Nobody gets to say that. We don't get to do that in this life. We don't get to say, you can't make fun of me for this. Like, why would that be?
But why do, when religions battle each other, why do they not attack each other in a funny way?
Because they're humorless, basically. Because,
but if that's their weakest point, you'd think that somebody who's waging a jihad would be a really great stand-up comedian.
Yeah, except that it's more or less antithetical to the funny. Like, funny things are based on sort of being a little looser, a little more relaxed, a little less uptight. You can't really be so uptight and be funny. You also can't believe that you possess absolute truth because, like, funny things often revolve around surprise. Something happens you don't expect. And if you think you kind of know the absolute truth, like capital T truth, you're not going to be funny. I mean, it can't, they're not funny. They're like, conservative evangelical Christians are the least funny people I've ever known in my life. They're so unfunny. They're so dismally unfunny. They have like the most stunted, like atrophied senses of humor I've come across. I assume that Muslims are even less funny. I just haven't really interacted with them on that level. The people who are, of course, famously, historically, really funny are Jews who really are funny, but they've got a different relationship with God, many of them.
Let's clarify, there are many flavors of Judaism here.
Yeah, right. And I'm talking about not Orthodox, people, walking around in their little, black suits and with not that, because they're just the same as evangelicals. No, it would be more like, liberal and reform.
Let's examine that. Like, why are liberal Jews so goddamn funny? Like, why are they? And part of it is like, why does their families, why do their cultures value performance, storytelling, and humor as much as they do?
It's another giant question, isn't it? I mean,
part of it is the way they learn. They do a lot of when they learn in Torah, they ask questions, they give answers back. So if you could become a good debater, you do well in class, and if you can make people laugh, you're going to get a higher score. That can be part of it. So they're good storytellers.
I would go back to the Old Testament too, and I would say that it's built into the Old Testament. If you read it carefully, there's a tremendous amount of doubt. Like the very people that this is happening to, like Moses is always having to discipline his tribe because they don't believe what's happening. They're like skeptical while it's happening. So these people, it goes all the way back. These are very skeptical, hard-headed people who ask really tough questions. It's in the book. And that helps too.
Why does God hate snakes so damn much? There's so many animals and insects and things to hate.
It seems like he's projecting his hatred for Satan onto. It's a really funny moment because it's like, why are you cursing snakes? That snake's a puppet. Satan, you're like, why are you not cursing Satan at that moment? He's doing what's happening, not the snake. And furthermore, your curse is utterly moronic. I curse you, snake, to slither on the ground all your life. It's like snakes already slither on the ground. Genius. Like, that's a non-curse.
Because it looks like a penis. That's why.
So he can't take his eyes off it, and he's fascinated by it, and he hates himself for it. Yeah.
I mean, does God hate all phallic-shaped creatures? Or because I went to Catholic high school for 3 months. And quickly it was like, oh, I need to go someplace else. We did it for fun in my family, and I asked the nun that was teaching like the religion class. I said, like, if he cursed the snake to crawl on the ground, and from all the pictures I've seen, illustrations, the snake was already crawling when he offered.
But it was in a tree, I think.
Well, guess what?
What?
Back in the day, the snake was conceived as more of a salamander.
Right. And, you do see that.
And they cursed the snake, and also the snake had a human-like face. So in certain paintings of the depiction of the snake giving the apple of knowledge to Adam and Eve, it's like a sexy naked lady that's green, hanging in a tree with a tail, and not the snake that we think of slithering in the ground.
If you want to see a really, really great version of the image, like look at Bosch. It's either in The Last Judgment or The Garden of Earthly Delights. I forget which one, but there's an image where it's basically Satan in the tree offering the fruit down but Satan's just a naked man. He's just like, that's weird. It's just a naked man in a tree with sort of green skin offering the apple down, which is fantastic. Which I love.
One of my friend's kids went to a Catholic grade school, and he had brought home his religion book, and I looked at it, and I wish I had copied it or something. This is back in the day before, this is the 80s. So, but it was Jesus being tempted in the desert, and it's basically like the devil behind Jesus, and it basically looks like he's fucking Jesus in the ass, and Jesus is in some weird ecstasy, and I'm just kind of like, what's going on here?
Well, an interesting temptation, no?
Yeah.
This could be yours, Jesus.
But the Bible is so fragmented. It's like, even like I remember learning too that the story of Adam and Eve was written over the span of thousands of years in 3 different instances. And so it's just kind of like people they hodgepodge this kind of stuff together, and I think that's part of the reason why much of it doesn't make sense, because they get a fragment from here and a fragment from there, and they're like, hey, let's just put all this together and see what happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, to the extent that there's like two different creations of Adam and Eve. I mean, it's like this book needs a better editor, because like one of these, like in one version, Adam's created first and then Eve like comes from his rib, right? Mm-hmm. And the other version, they're both created simultaneously, sort of out of the mud. So they both happen like back to back, and like, wait, what? Which one is it? Right. How'd that happen? Not to mention, I really think this is an interesting and strange moment. And like all the most interesting and strange moments in the Bible is not commented on. Like none of them are like all the boring moments, they'll shine a bright light on and it's like, yeah, whatever. And they're obvious. But the really weird, interesting moments tend to just go by and they don't really talk about them. And there's a really, really interesting moment where God says he creates Eve. And he says, I make her in my own image. Now, that's really strange. And that's really fascinating when you think about it, because God is clearly kind of presented to us as a male, but he's creating a woman in his own image as well. So God is both male and female.
Is gender queer.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's one way of putting it. Yeah, right at the start. But of course, they never comment on that. And he's like super, he's super male all the rest of the time. But I find that to be a very strange moment.
Well, I do believe in a very deep sense that gender nonconforming people inspire a religious state of being with people. And you go to like a drag show or you see people are fascinated by gender nonconformists.
Right.
And part of it is because it messes with the part of our brain that says, you are a man or you are a woman, and suddenly it's like anything can be possible.
Right.
So when a person sees somebody, and you look at some religions, like their deities are very gender nonconforming, especially like Eastern religions.
Right.
I mean, Shiva's wearing lipstick, and every Indian person that I've had like lots of guests, the Hijras, but like
eunuchs.
But, they're central figures. If you look at all those Indian paintings, all the male figures sometimes they have tits, sometimes they're wearing full-on makeup by anybody's standards. And I'm like, and I asked them about that, and they just take it for granted. They said, that's what a god looks like. Right. A god wears lipstick.
So why, in your view, because you've talked to a lot of people, why are we unable to see things that way in the West?
Because when we are able to blast away at the categories we subconsciously create for ourselves, it creates a excited state in the subconscious mind that is very much like being in a trance at church.
But you'd think that would be something people would love and be drawn to.
They do. Believe me, they do. They even when they hate something, it's because they love it. Hate and love is really two ways of describing obsession.
Oh, I see. Okay. I get what you're saying.
God loves dicks a lot.
Yeah, God does love dicks.
But he hates them too. So he's always like, he wakes up in the morning and instead of brushing his teeth, he's like thinking cock, 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 cock.
I would say that's about right. Yes.
What kind of reaction have you gotten from true believers of the book?
Absolute radio silence so far. And what that means, I don't know. Have they simply not read it, or do they not want to even acknowledge it, or are they just sputtering with blind rage? I don't really know. I was expecting by this point. I wrote a movie a few years ago called Rapture Palooza, which is a comedic version of the rapture and everything that happens afterwards. And at the end of it, Jesus is returning to Earth, and he actually accidentally gets laser beamed out of the sky and killed by the two main characters, and then God gets fried in a hot tub. So, I've kind of done this thing before, and I got a lot of nasty kind of like, you're going to roast in hell. I got a lot of that on Rapture Palooza. It's so far been absolute silence. So is that ominous, or is that, I don't know what it means.
That means they don't read.
I think they don't. I don't think they're going to want to read my book because, my fantasy would be an 18, 20, 22-year-old who's just not sure, right? Who's kind of on the fence, who's got doubts, who's like, man, I just don't know. There's things that I'm just not comfortable with, but my family believes I've been, and somehow they read my book and they're like, oh my God, this guy is relentlessly just touching on every single thing that I've wondered about and making fun of it. I would love to reach that reader. Will I reach that reader? Who the hell knows?
Initially, when you created Bill and Ted for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, you were saying in a past interview that you wanted them to be responsible for all the atrocities of history. But then you started realizing it would be a bad idea to make your heroes, the central characters, responsible for the Holocaust.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. We thought it was funny, superficially, like these guys, without even knowing it, they just sort of stumble through history and cause everything bad to happen. But yeah, very quickly, you bump into the implications of that. Like, right, Bill and Ted are responsible for the Holocaust. Okay, that's a non-starter. We're not going to do that.
But it's interesting because, like, especially when you combine the two movies, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and the sequel, you have sort of like a theology there in some regard.
Well, they go to heaven and hell in Bogus Journey. So, yeah, right. No, there's future, there's past, there's heaven, there's hell. Yeah, Ed and I wanted to just go all over. We're just I don't know.
And I love that you sort of based one of the characters after David Lee Roth.
Very, very specifically in our mind. Like that state, right. It ends up being George Carlin, who was great. You know, he was great. He's super great as Rufus. But no, for us, it was like, it was David Lee Roth because we found him amusing.
Did you know what happened to David Lee Roth after he left Van Halen, like the last 20 years of his life? It's fascinating.
Isn't he back with Van Halen now?
He's back with that. Well, he was, he was paid to do a show with them.
Oh, I see. He's not part of the band.
But he became a paramedic. He became a martial arts.
No.
Yes,
no.
sir. Yes, sir.
David Lee Roth became a paramedic?
He got his paramedic's license, and for a while in New York City, if you got into a car accident or had a heart attack or something, it would be Diamond Dave giving you, CPR or putting you on a stretcher. And for a while, he was also became a black belt in martial arts. And
holy shit!
Yeah, David Lee Roth's life is quite complicated and fascinating.
Are you a Van Halen fan, or how do you?
I was a Van Halen fan, but we just did a show about the history of the song "Just a Gigolo" as it transformed past almost the last 80 years. Right. And the thing about that sort of impressed me upon David Lee Roth is like he's leaving Van Halen. He felt like he was a hired gun to be in the band, and so one of the songs that he really wanted to cover was "Just a Gigolo." Because he felt like his contributions to the band were empty in some regard, and he felt like he was just the eye candy, the razzle dazzle of showbiz to a pair of brothers who ultimately wanted to be musicians and not performers.
Wow.
And, yeah, and there's a lot of interesting analysis in the video for Just a Gigolo. He's doing a striptease for a censor board, which includes a Catholic priest. So it's a rare moment that you have a male figure in 80s pop music trying to sexually seduce another male figure and succeeds in it.
So it worked. Heart attack.
He's so hot and sexy, Diamond Dave, that he gives the priest a heart attack and the priest dies. And so his coked out doctor and sexy nurse try to revive him, but they couldn't give a fuck because Dave is too awesome.
I love that. That is fantastic. That guy, I would say in the best possible way, David Lee Roth is a freak.
Yeah.
He's just...
and he was rumored to be bisexual for a long time, but I think in hindsight and looking back at his life and reading interviews about him, he strikes me as just a very passionate, flamboyant guy who grew up in California listening to all these weird little radio stations and Dr. Demento. He's kind of like Weird Al Yankovic, only he made a lot more money.
So your assessment of him is ultimately he's probably straight.
Yeah, I would get, he's a straight guy who loves to wear skirts and, jewelry and tease up his hair and wear makeup. But, just
the only thing, that I heard about David Lee Roth somewhere in the 80s. And I don't know, this is just a little story that must have circulated through showbiz or something. But somebody told me David Lee Roth was famous for saying to people, you know what I'm really good at? And the other person would say, what? Fucking chicks in the ass. That's
I believe it.
Yeah, it's right. It's totally plausible, right? Like, that's not a story you'd go, oh, no way.
Well,
Come
then
on.
he's recently gotten on YouTube, and he's doing like I guess he taught himself how to play the guitar, like Madonna. This happens to all these like big name pop stars and towards the end of their careers.
Yeah.
They're like, I always wanted to learn how to play a musical instrument. Ironically, as a musician, I never learned. So Madonna and David Lee Roth and all these other guys, like they pick up the guitar, and so they're on YouTube. And the funny thing is, like, when people learn musical instruments after the age of like 50,
yeah,
they're usually like they're obsessed with the precision of their fingers and their thing. So David Lee Roth is just like Madonna, really trying really hard to play the guitar,
Doesn't come natural. I hear that there's a Bill and Ted 3 going to come and happen. Is that true?
We are working on it. We are working hard, and I actually think we're getting pretty close at this point.
Is the script done?
Oh, yeah. We got together with Alex and Keanu a number of years ago. Ed Solomon and I, we wrote the two movies together. Mm-hmm. We got together with them a few years ago, and like 5 years ago, and said, should we do this? And we thought, well, yeah, if we had the right idea, and we all came up with an idea that we liked, and Ed and I wrote it. And so now we're just trying to get the money in place to do it.
How do you handle the fact that these iconic characters are, it's hard for us to imagine them growing up and aging. They're cartoons in some sense, but unfortunately the actors that play them are no longer young.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I mean, my understanding, I could be wrong about this, but I'm not sure literally anybody's ever done it ever, like taken teenage boy characters and grown them up and met them again at the age of 50. And you're right, there are challenges with that. We've tried to, Bill and Ted come really naturally for Ed and me. I mean, they just sort of flow. They just have a voice, and the voice, I would say, is to some degree ageless, because part of this movie is we've written them at a variety of ages, including like really old, like in their 90s, we're writing them even. And that's part of the story, that they visit themselves in really old age, and they're still Bill and Ted for us. So we tried to kind of like lean into or believe that the voices of these guys are very kind of pure and upbeat, and they're just Bill and Ted. They're sort of we feel them on some deep level, and therefore we're gonna try to realistically explore what these 25 years have done and who they actually would be. But you're right, there's a challenge to it, because, well, I mean, there hasn't been a movie made where like Jeff Spicoli is 50 years old. So we'll see. I think, it was easy for us to write them again. And we know these guys, we hear these guys, and they make sense to us. And, I'm pretty optimistic about it. But you're right, it is a challenge.
But don't we all have that experience of like the most funny, awesome person we knew in high school grew up to be this like loser? I think in some ways it's a very
like they
tragic.
Peaked in high school.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways they're sort of tragic figures because it reminds us of the pain and suffering of aging.
You may well turn out to be right, in which case the things you're saying are going to be highly and sadly prophetic.
So are you?
Well, I really love your franchise, and I'm just only saying this as to give you some perspective or inspire you to make the best movie possible.
My feeling would be that people would see it and they'd go, oh yeah, it's Bill and Ted. They still feel like Bill and Ted. They still have that Bill and Ted energy, but they're grown men. And basically, we were presented with the choice of like, either they did write the greatest song of all time, they did save the world, it's happened, in which case there's some kind of weird kings or on top of the world, Mick and Keith, whatever. We didn't want to do that. We didn't see any jokes there, or it just hasn't happened. And like, they're dealing with that reality. And like, what do you do? You were supposed to save the world and you haven't done it. And then the pressure gets turned up. Like, people show up like, you got to save the world now, get to it. So yeah, that's what we're going for. I hope it works. I mean, it was fun to write. We laughed a lot writing it.
Are you more Bill or are you more Ted?
Bill and Ted are. It's the deal with Bill and Ted, especially early on. When we started writing them, like back in the 84, we would just write dialogue. We would just sit at a table in a coffee shop and just go bang, 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 back and forth. And then we'd go back to the start of the dialogue and go Bill, Ted, Bill, Ted, Bill, Ted. So they were kind of the same. Now because Alex and Keanu are really different kinds of guys, they've evolved and become different. But I would say Ed and I are both Bill and Ted, really.
So you're saying that basically Bill and Ted are characters that allow each other to react to each other. They're initially started off as sort of identical.
Yeah, they started off as kind of like, one brain in two human beings, essentially. And now, now they're different. I mean, I would say they're a little different in the second movie, but now, 25 years have passed, and they're different. I mean, they're still similar in really important ways, and they understand each other well. But
are you familiar with the documentary Grey Gardens?
Oh, sure.
I would love to see a Bill and Ted treatment. That would be actually kind of a fascinating situation where they're like kind of, what is the French term, Mark? A fa de Dieu?
Folie à Dieu.
Where two people sort of delude themselves into this system that they're in, and sort of they became this perfect bubble of madness and insanity that isolates itself from the rest of the world.
It sounds pretty interesting. Did you?
I'm just talking out here my ass. But hey, so since we have you here on the show, and I'm a big fan of your father's writing as well. I wanted to talk about Terror at 20,000...
Nightmare at 20,000 feet.
Nightmare at 20,000 feet, the famous Twilight Zone episode where William Shatner freaks out because he sees a monster on the wing of the plane, which a lot of people have interpreted as a man struggling with his homosexuality.
Is that true? I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, so in the beginning of the story, it's revealed that he's coming back from an insane asylum, which where a lot of like gay and lesbian people were put in. Oh. Back in that time period, and the monster symbolizes his struggle with his sexuality, and inevitably he loses. Yeah. In that struggle.
And we saw a really great treatment here by a local theater. They put on like a night of horror story shorts, and they chose this one, and they pretty much took all the dialogue. I think it was verbatim dialogue, except the monster on the wing was Cher.
Yeah. A Cher impersonator.
A Cher impersonator, and would come out and like sing like a lip sync a song, and he'd be freaking out every time. And it was brilliant.
And when you sort of like switch the monster to Cher, instantly it makes it very, very clear this is a story about a gay man struggling with his sexuality.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, did you ever talk about that with your dad, or
I never
analyze that in any way?
I never did have that conversation with my dad. Actually, I wish I had. It would have been a really interesting. My dad was born in 1926, and his parents were Norwegian immigrants. And my dad very likely would have said, "Oh, no, that's ridiculous," I think. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I would have gotten much traction if I'd said, "So, Dad, that thing on the wing, does that represent kind of like your projection of your homosexual impulses?"
Not his homosexual projections.
Well, that's what it would have been, though.
Well, you know what it is, though. I think for a lot of people, it's whatever it is you're fearing. That's what's out on the plane, and gay people are going to see gay things in that.
Yeah, it would have been an interesting conversation to have. Probably a fairly short conversation, and then I would have been following around. But Dad, well, hold on,
Well, and what was your relationship with your dad? Because you guys are sort of like well known for both of your writing, and did he admire your work?
Oh, this is such a complicated question. This is really, you ask somebody about their relationship with their father or mother, and there's a couple of different ways of answering that. I mean, I could give a short answer, and I could talk to you for the next 3 hours about this. That's a hard one. That's a hard one. It's my dad, and we did the same job. And my dad was a complicated man and God, that's a hard question. We were very, very, very close at times, extremely close for a long, long period of time. And then we weren't. And sadly, by the end, we had very, very little relationship left at all. And, that's kind of how it went. But we were very close while I was growing up. I think, he's not here. My dad's dead, and my dad's not here to defend anything or argue a contrary, point of view to anything I'm going to say. So it's just my point of view. My personal belief is it's like being the father to a son. There's a lot of challenges. One of the many challenges is when they do become sort of a competitor. When they actually become like they are a young man, and they're actually they're not a boy anymore who just looks up to you and admires you and thinks you're the greatest thing in the world, which I did, by the way, for a long time. I think that's a challenge. I don't know whether my dad nailed that part of being a dad. He nailed other parts. He was really nice to me a lot of the time.
Your relationship with your dad kind of reminds me a lot of mine as well, and it's like, I remember one time I bought a Solo Flex, and my dad was like an older man as well. And he was very insistent about lifting this weightlifting equipment into the house. And it was like, you're going to throw out your back. You're going to, but for him, it was like symbolic. Like, it was very important to bring in this symbol of masculinity.
Yeah.
And to be able to tell to me, a teenage boy, it's like, I'm still strong and I can still, even though I'm, almost in a wheelchair, I can still move stuff around,
Yeah, well, when you're the man, when you're the patriarch, so to speak, and your son starts growing up, it's going to be a tricky moment for a lot of men. You've got to be a little subtle. You got to have a little new emotional nuance to you. And really, in my view, if you're a good dad, you very kind of gracefully move aside and go, it's your turn. You're young, you're strong, go get them, like that's the beautiful thing to do in my view, but not so easy necessarily.
But in some regard, it's like the love that we receive and the nurturing that we receive from our parents is their way of saying it's your turn now, and he created this foundation for you to become this amazing author. And I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and your writing is really extraordinary.
Thank you very much. That's a great way of looking at it. I will mull that over, No, really. I mean, that's a very, lovely way of looking at it. And I think there's truth to that. And it's very easy to get caught up in the hurt feelings of the things that your parents did that maybe hurt your feelings, and they just never go away, sadly, or they don't for me. Everything sticks with me. I'm the opposite of like water off a duck's back, right? It's like everything's oil on a duck's back for me. Everything sticks, I never seem to get over anything in some weird way. But I hear what you're saying. That's really nice. I like that.
Well, he made it possible for you to be this amazing. And you did a lot too. But at the same time, it's like we benefit from both your dad and your work. Our lives are richer and more fabulous, and excellent adventures continue to happen because of all the work that you and your dad and your grandfather and your grandfather's father and all that stuff. And so, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because of your book has a very cosmic analysis of something that ultimately we have to continue to ask ourselves: who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going?
Right.
And
that question.
And last but not least, it's like, why is the Bible, when we're talking about where we're going, ultimately we're all going to apocalypse? Which, right? It's like,
pretty much.
Heaven is this one place, hell is this another place, but the apocalypse is this psychedelic adventure full of things that never talked about elsewhere, multi-headed beasts, and
right.
Why is the Bible so when deciding
It's madness.
to end the world, why is it so psychedelic?
You ask such good questions. Man, it's like, well, everything else, I guess you'd say, has some constraints on it. And so it's the most science fiction-y part of it. It's the most purely fantastical part because it's in the future, right? It hasn't happened. And so it's this sort of fever dream, this like what feels kind of druggy. You're right. It feels like somebody on mushrooms wrote Revelations. That's what I think you're talking about. You're talking about Revelations. And it really does feel super druggy and kind of mad and visionary. It also, I will say, on some deep level, is the perfect ending for the character of God, because all of his sort of incipient, enraged madness comes into full bloom in Revelations, and he becomes this kind of amazing supervillain who it just like what he really wants. It turns out in the end, what he wants is just to punish everybody in the most brutal possible way while he has a chorus singing to him about how wonderful he is. It's amazing. He becomes a weird mix of like Hitler and Elton John in Revelations.
Is there a Hitler and Elton John in all of us? And when God is inside all of us, I guess Hitler and Elton John is inside of us.
It's a kind of a interesting mix, but yeah, probably.
Because maybe that's the ultimate gift of these kind of Middle Eastern religions is like, don't be an asshole.
They're giant cautionaries. Ultimately, they're just huge, slowly unfolding cautionaries. Don't be such an asshole. You're sharing the planet with other people. Stop being such an asshole. Yeah, really, it's great advice. You should make a bumper sticker. Don't be an asshole.
What I love about your book, though, too, is like, a couple hundred years ago, you'd be in prison if you wrote something like this. A few hundred years ago, they would have burned you at the stake, tortured you, hung you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. And if they could now, they would, by the way. If they could like pull me out of my house and just, drag me behind a car and set me on fire, they of course they would, and Islam's doing that stuff right now, right? I mean, they still do that stuff. So, but yeah, this is the moment that we finally get to express ourselves. This is the moment where their little cloak of their impenetrable cloak that they can't be criticized. It's not working, and we can laugh at them, and man, we should. And I want to take advantage of that.
Well, I think it's also interesting with Muslim or with Islam. It's okay in the religion not to believe in God or Muhammad. You're just not allowed to say it. So in your heart, you don't have to believe it. You just can't say it to anybody else. So it's kind of crazy.
Is that actually in the Quran?
I guess so. Yeah, we interviewed somebody who Michael Luango, who did a book called "Gay Travels in the Middle East," which is really
in the Muslim world.
In the Muslim world, that's it.
Wow.
And he said, and the other thing that he said is like they're all having gay sex with each other. It's just like with Sharia law. Is like as long as there's no witness, it's okay. So you can you can go one-on-one because you're not going to rat. But if you have a three-way. Don't do it.
Don't do it, guys. Stick to one-on-one.
Chris, I have another burning question that I forgot to bring up. Is have you ever seen or stumbled across like the Bill and Ted /fiction stories or? And
is there a porno? Isn't there a porno?
Oh, there's everything.
Not much. Is it interesting?
Well, it's just to it's interesting because when you have these sort of iconic characters that have a huge fan base, and then, after 20 or so years, they create a new movie, sort of like with, Kirk and Spock in the Star Trek movies. Right. There's always talk about, like, is this the time they're going to kiss each other,
Oh yeah,
it's a weird phenomena, or it's not a weird phenomena, but it's a phenomena of fans that they ultimately want to see all their favorite characters fucking each other.
Well, I will say that Bill and Ted love each other. They do clearly love each other, and I like that. That's always made them really fun to write and really enjoyable to think about. Like, these guys really love each other. And are they going to kiss? I don't know. I doubt it, but they do love each other.
Aw.
Are they gonna fuck? Yeah, they're gonna fuck. What are you talking about?
In
They're
the
not gonna kiss, but they're gonna fuck. Oh God, yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for talking to us.
That was great, guys.
Yeah.
Super fun.
It's fantastic to hear your thoughts on all these things, and I look forward to seeing the movie.
I hope it's soon. Thank you, guys. That was really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Chris Matheson's new book, The Story of God, a biblical comedy about love and hate, is available through our website, feastoffun.com. Fascinating writing. We just scratched the surface, huh?
Yeah. What I loved it too is like when we first got the email, he says, I was wondering if you'd like to talk to me. I wrote this book, The Story of God. I also wrote Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I was just like, you had me at Bill and Ted.
Yeah. You had me at Excellent Adventure. What'd you make out of, you grew up in this religion neck deep.
I did, and as a kid, it was like said, it was like they tell us these Bible stories, and on the surface, they don't seem so bad. There's stories, and you're like, well, it's, but then when you get older and you start to do more research, because as you get older, they tell you these more stories, and you look at other parts of the Bible, and you're like, God, this is all so messed up, and why is this in here? And that's terrible. And then you start thinking, like, with this mindset that we have today about equality and women's rights, and you're like, none of this makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, but I think that, what I took from the book and this conversation with Chris is that we have a broken system in our brains about how we relate to storytelling. And that there's this, and it was interesting, like watching the TV show Narcos about the Colombian cartel.
The
Medellin cartel, and going online and reading about this. People are not so much interested in what they learn from watching it or the story itself. They're obsessing about, did this really happen or did this really not happen? And like, even when you hear conversations about science fiction, usually it revolves around, is it possible to actually have, say, a lightsaber? Is it is this real?
Thing, right?
Is this possible to have real? And there's this fallibility of humanity that we have a real hard time balancing myth, with fact, with storytelling versus journalism. And that stems from ultimately our desire to have control or have some sort of impact in the world we live in. We don't want to live in a world of shadows and clouds and monsters.
And reading the Bible is like, you feel like you're going to get answers from it. But like, as somebody who's actually read, I haven't read all the Bible, but certain passages of it, and it's impossible to read. It is so difficult to read. The wording, the phrasing, the things that they're talking about are just, it's so hard to understand. And I have a master's degree. I can read books. And so I'm always like, surprised by people that are sitting there reading the Bible. It's like, are you just looking at the words, or is this kind of stuff making any kind of sense to you?
Well, the reality right now is that we have a printing press, we have the internet, we have digital documentation of our culture and our writing. Theological books and stories can only happen when you don't have those perfect ways of keeping records of things. So when, one generation can say, well, that's not really how the story went, it's this other way. And finally, it's up to King James, for example, to, wrote what we think of the Bible and Dante's Inferno to sort of give us the idea of what hell really is like, because ultimately the Bible doesn't really explain what hell is. It doesn't really give us that.
I think there
that
are
cartoon,
some things in there, but yeah.
Like the movie, Santa Claus versus Satan, made in Mexico, again gives us yet another interpretation of Satan and hell and what these characters are and what they symbolize. And so, if, in my opinion, and the way I like to approach it is, if you want to have a healthy relationship with religions and not become this sort of like, Little Miss Know-It-All atheist, is just to treat them as Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or Harry Potter or Star Wars. It's just a movie.
Yeah, but it's also very people can be also very dangerous as well. I mean, you look at somebody like Kim Davis who's saying, I have this religious liberty, and then they're infringing upon other people's rights. And like he said, and it is true, they'd love to nothing more than to drag us out of the house and burn us at a stake if they could.
Well, and if you see somebody who's saying, the reason I made this decision is because it's the Jedi Knight Code. You're like, Jedi Knight Code was developed by George Lucas, and George Lucas is wrong about pretty much everything. Like, even Star Wars was saved because his wife edited it to make it the movie not suck as
and,
much.
I guess I didn't realize what a hateful God. You hear about, God can be vengeful, but it's like when I grew up in the Catholic Church in the 70s and 80s, it was always very, God is about love and it's about peace and, social justice, that kind of thing. But, it took me until we discovered Westboro Baptist Church and talked to Shirley Phelps is that just how much God hates everyone and everything for, you name it, he hates it. And so it's, I don't know, for me, it's like when people read the Bible and they're like, well, God hates this. It gives them just a reason to hate things.
God is insecure. Mm-hmm. God is immature. God has a poor sense of humor. God hates women. God hates men. Mm-hmm. God hates everything. There is God inside all of us.
One thing I don't hate is Cooking with Drag Queens, our new web series. We just premiered one of our latest episodes with the legendary Lady Bunny, and she shares with us a recipe that her mother taught her. And we add a little spice to it as well. We throw a little cactus in there to kind of give it a feast of fun flair. And I got to tell you, Cooking with Lady Bunny is just an absolute treasure. It is. She was so much fun.
She is, yeah.
I want to remind people, too, is like Lady Bunny and her appearance in the video Strawberry Shortcut that she did with Tom Rubnitz in the 1980s, I guess it aired on local cable access television shows throughout New York, is what inspired our whole series because we're just like, look how fun this is, seeing drag, not in a bar, not on a stage, but, cooking something domestic.
Well, it's interesting because you have all these drag queens who are sort of creating this iconography, these images of femininity, but we only see the showgirls most of the time. We don't see the domestic goddess.
Yeah.
And what I really like about Cooking with Drag Queens that we've been able to explore is not just the domestic goddess side of drag, but also LGBT cuisine. The fact that gay people have their own culinary tastes and interests, much like Thai food or
a lot
Chinese
of them are
food.
Vegetarians, or maybe they do eat meat like Lady Bunny and Trixie, but they like to focus on vegetarian dishes.
Yeah, and it was also interesting, and we didn't get to show this in the episode, so we'll be doing a in-depth look at Lady Bunny's episode with Cooking with Drag Queens if we can get her on the show. Is we revisited Strawberry Shortcut 30 years later. And for people who haven't seen either video, Strawberry Shortcut involves answering the dilemma, what kind of dessert do you make for people when you don't have anything ready to serve them? And so in the video, Lady Bunny is at a ladies' luncheon, and all the girls go, "What's for dessert?" And she goes, "I don't have dessert." Oh, shit. So she goes to the kitchen and pulls out some donuts, pours cherry 7-Up on top of them, slathers them with raspberry preserves, strawberries, and whipped cream. And it looks demented. And so we made this in front of Lady Bunny, and she was just shocked that this is how it went.
Yeah, she was like, "What?" Because
she
we
wouldn't
surprised
accept
her with
it. Yeah,
she wouldn't. And so we spill the beans. It's like
she wouldn't eat it.
She wouldn't eat the Strawberry Shortcut. And so we said, well, we're gonna make because we did another thing. We're gonna do an updated version of it. And so we kind of did. When we made the Luther burgers with Darien Lake with the toasted donuts, we discovered that toasted donuts, when you cut a donut in half and you put it in a pan and you toast it, it changes it from this dull little donut to something really delicious. So then we made that with ice cream and whipped cream and strawberries. And so when you see at the end of the video, that's actually what she's eating, and that she would eat. But yeah, I think it was really why I still don't understand.
Maybe part of it is that she
lost Tom.
Tom is no longer with us, and he was a close friend of hers, and I think they lived together, right? And he videotaped her.
No, you're thinking Nelson Sullivan.
No, but Tom Rubnitz,
really?
she also lived with him as well. And so, that might have been, he was a close friend of hers, and it was, it's just hard to lose a friend, and it's like to bring, this dessert. It's kind of like it's cursed. I don't want to eat that dessert because it's
next time we're on the podcast, next time we get her on the podcast, we'll definitely kind of follow up with that a little
examine
bit.
That, yeah.
But yeah, so
Cooking with Drag Queens is an amazing web series, and it allows us to bring video cameras and show the extraordinary lives of all these gender nonconforming performers. But it doesn't make any money. It loses and drains a ton of money and resources for us. And it's not it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the financial support of people like you. Right now, we're trying to do a Kickstarter to raise $25,000 by November 12th. And if everybody listening to this just donated $1, pledge a single dollar, change underneath your sofa. We're not asking for a lot of money off of you. There's a lot of great rewards if you want to be generous and give bigger things. We have cookbooks, cookies, baked goods, aprons, T-shirts, behind the scenes footage. But every single person who makes a pledge or donation gets to see the episodes before they happen. Guess what's coming up this week?
Katya
Zamolochikova. Now, one thing I was examining, and I went on these websites that talk about pronunciation of Russian names, is that everybody's mispronouncing Katya. That it's a E and not a E. And it's Katya.
Katya.
Not Tia, Tea. It's a diphthong, but it's an E sound for the I, for the Y, and not a I sound. And so...
to be honest with you... I'm really over people correcting me on how to say Katya. I'll say Katya the way I say Katya.
Like she does.
Yeah.
Pretty
Katya.
Much. Well, that's kind of what's brilliant about her drag name is it's really, really hard to pronounce. Elaborate. Because it's not just Katya Zamolochikova. It's Katarina. Like it's this long, crazy name.
It's insane.
And that's what's so fun about Katya is her name and her... desire to sort of fuck with you because she always throws curveballs and you really don't know.
I can't wait for that.
Whether what she's saying is real or myth.
What are your top 3 favorite Cooking with Drag Queen episodes?
They're like my children, and I've worked so hard.
Love them all? I
do love them all, and then they all have different things. Certainly, like the first one we did with Lola von Miramar, where we made tostones, and you and I were in drag, and we were making. It was kind of Newick's territory. We were sort of trying to give a Puerto Rican spin to Strawberry Shortcut. That certainly was will always be close and near and dear to my heart, and certainly it was a real treat to cook with Lady Bunny. But as we do more episodes, like. It makes me realize where the strengths of the shows lies and where it could stand to get more development. And so if you look at, last year as a series, we're just getting started, people. We have so many exciting, wonderful things in the works for it, but it won't be possible if this Kickstarter doesn't happen. That'll be the end of the series. And it breaks my heart to say that it's like, I can't afford. I don't have that kind of money sitting around.
Yeah,
and I know that some listeners. I know that some of the listeners do, and they love this show, and they think that somebody else will be making that donation that'll make it possible. But it's not. It's going to take. If you are listening to this, you like that web series. It's only going to happen because you, not someone else, made a decision to make a significant donation.
So the best way to get there is to make it real easy for you. Just go to cookingwithdragqueens.com and you will find the link to help support the show.
That's right.
Because if we all chip in, we all do it together. I'm doing my part.
My mother donated money.
Yeah.
I got my mama giving some coins. Did you give some coins? My sweet, sweet mom, guys.
I also want to remind people, too, that we can't do this podcast without your support. And one of the best ways to support the show is to become a Plus member. And you can do that at feastoffun.com/plus because your contribution to the show is what makes this show happen.
And, of course, we have fabulous T-shirts for sale on our store, feastoffun.com/store. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.